Cool stuff. Okay, let's do the Starcraft video, shall we? I haven't been playing Starcraft 2 in a very, very long time, but I saw a video that was interesting to me, which was a video by Artosis, and it's called SC2 Needs a Shakeup, and apparently it's talking about worker reduction in Starcraft 2, so I just kind of wanted to hear his opinion on it, because this is something that I mentioned a while back in Starcraft, like I think in 2018, maybe even 17, that I think Starcraft would be a lot better if we actually reverted to 6 or at least go up to 9. And
Beasty!
I was initially one of the people that was all up for 12 workers in Starcraft 2. When they changed it, I thought it would be a lot better. And soon after, I felt like the strategy part of Starcraft 2 was kind of diminishing quite rapidly until it was completely gone and the game became a lot more repetitive, right? So, let's see.
Okay, so I had this idea a while ago. I was actually thinking about this when I was at EWC in Riyadh, the World Championships for Starcraft 2. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to chat with you about it. We chatted just a little bit earlier today. I'm like, you know what? We should just do this on stream, and because this is an interesting conversation. Yeah. But like, okay, so here it is. Basically, this is what prompted my thinking about it. So I think that the volatility is too low in StarCraft 2. It is too likely that the better player will win because you have to have a certain amount of upset potential or it becomes very bad. So to put this in perspective, back in the day, like Quake 3 tournaments were really kind of crappy because the best player always won, and like the top 4 guys were always in top 4, and the top 8 guys were always in top 8, and the top 16 guys were always in top 16. And it was the same people every tournament finishing in almost exactly the same spots. And it's just kind of like a little bit anticlimactic. And I feel like StarCraft 2 has almost gotten there. It's not exactly what Quake is, but I think the volatility is too low. Like, if you look at Serral win rates, for instance, I think it makes a little bit of boringness. And something like, I know that Tasteless for sure, he didn't like it when Flash was in his prime in ASL because it was so obvious he was going to win. Now, Flash's win rate was like a bit over 70%. And I actually I just had ChatGPT do some math for me. And it was like, okay, so if you're in a best of 5, which is, well, we've actually expanded a lot to best of 7s in Brood War, but back then it was best of 5s. But in a best of 5, if you have like, let's just call it a 70% win rate, going into a best of 5, you're going to win the best of 5 like over 82% of the time. Mm-hmm. Now look at Serral. He's got like a win rate that I believe is even higher than that. It's something like an 80% win rate.
It is, yeah.
So if you go into a best of 5 or a best of 5, or, well, here's the thing, in StarCraft 2 it's even more, right? So here, I'm just going to type it in because the math I did was for a best of 5, so I actually need to do it on so in a best of 5, if you have an 80% win rate, you're going to win the best of 5 94% of the time.
That's crazy.
Makes sense. I think
so that's, so basically my thing is, I think that that's too much. I think that win rate is too high and it actually detracts from the quality of viewing.
Okay, so this is a very interesting thing. So this is something, like I said, I talked about this a long time ago. I think it was 2017 or 18. There's probably videos on my YouTube channel about this, but with the introduction of like 12 workers, you basically removed a huge part of the early game, which I know for a lot of people was like very boring to watch, but there was a lot more time to where you were on 1 base, 2 base, 3 base to do something, right? And then with 12 workers, you basically had no time to do anything, or you had one shot. Like your Banshee would arrive, you have about 10 to 20 seconds to do something, and then the Banshees are like running around or doing something, or if you're, no matter what race you're playing, your time, like Oracle timing or whatever, is much lower. So basically, with introduction of something like that, what ends up happening is the best players will excel, like he's saying, a lot more, because all they need to do is perfect that first like harassment, and it's a lot worse. It's a lot harder for a worse player to upset a better player, because Starcraft used to be in wings and less so in HOTS, very build order oriented, and early legacy as well, where it was like you could surprise your opponent, you could do a lot of weird stuff, and you would see new builds all the time. And it was a lot more exciting for me to not also play, but watch as well, because you never knew what's going to happen like in the next tournament, or who's going to come with a new build and stuff like that. Now the new builds are like variations of the same build with super small changes that doesn't really impact too much. Like you cannot shock your opponent. And I feel like the builds that surprise your opponent or whatever, you just can't do them because there's not enough time. Because like I said, that timing of first to second to third base is so small that if you don't manage to do any damage then, the game just transitions to the next stage. And that was something that I talked about back then, and how it's a problem, and how in my opinion it's going to be a problem long term, because the game might become too just same thing over and over, and that's what ended up happening long term. And I heard that now people, since again I don't follow StarCraft, but people are apparently doing even less builds, variations than it used to be, because people probably just learned how to defend it or how to do against it, and then just learned like, oh, this is better because I have maybe a little bit of a better chance to do something, and so on.
And it's not that, it's like you need a certain amount of randomness. Mm-hmm. So yeah, well, let's get some of your thoughts first, and then I'll give some more mine. That was quite a preamble there.
Well, first off, I don't disagree, obviously. I think one of your more interesting points or perspectives was around the uncertainty that, I guess, the StarCraft grew more certain with time. People became more, they became better mechanically.
96.6% to win a best of 7.
Yeah. I mean, they came back.
Obviously, I just want to throw one more thing. I'm so sorry. Okay. One more thing, because I already know what like the YouTube comments would be. Well, I mean, it's not. He doesn't have 80% against Clem. Yes, I know. This is just like some general math to kind of show how crazy the win percentages are. But go ahead.
Okay.
Oh wait, one more thing. No,
okay.
Sorry. Okay.
All right. So yes, there isn't very much volatility. I think StarCraft 2 has become quite figured out. I remember when I played, because I played from the very beginning. Over time, especially towards when I was starting to get better and better, I realized there were very few actual options in StarCraft 2 in all the matchups. Mm-hmm. Like you would think, especially as a viewer, that there's way more opportunities to do things that are unexpected, or there's way more opportunities to do like upsetting actions in a StarCraft 2 match. There really aren't. You'll notice that some of the best players are not that very many. They're not very many cheeses. Even 12 pull against Hatch First, for example, does not work. Like that does not kill. Even when you do the drone pulls, sometimes they still are able to hold it. And yeah, people like Serral, they're able to defend basically everything. They go into a late game that they know they're favored in because they have the most experience and are the best there. And you basically get the same outcome over and over and over again. There really isn't very many ways to punish a predictable playstyle, right? Mm-hmm. Normally in StarCraft, if you have an expectation that someone's going to play a certain type of way,
So there's no way to punish a predictable playstyle is something that should happen in every RTS game. Like if you know, for example, no matter what RTS game you play, if you're expanding, right, you go fast expand. If you're doing that every game, there should be a blind build order that is heavily favored against you or can punish you like in a massive way. And StarCraft 2 lost that a long time ago, where even if you know someone's gonna do X or Y, you can still defend with whatever you were doing. Or on the other side, if you're cheesing all the time and the opponent knows like, oh, this guy is super cheesy, you don't even need to necessarily change your build order. You just change the positioning of your units, or maybe you make X instead of Y first, but you just keep doing the same thing. And yeah.
Should be able to combat or abuse that. That's not really possible anymore.
Yeah.
So for example, knowing Sarah will be...
Anymore, by the way, this has started happening a long time ago, right? So this is, in my opinion, this is not a thing that StarCraft is having now. This is a thing that StarCraft has had for a few years now.
Greedy does not help you, right? Or knowing Cyril will play a certain type of way, you can watch Cyril's replays, does not help you, really.
Yeah. Actually, I believe it was at the last Katowice I casted, Creator went up against Cyril, and I was actually betting on Creator to win because his PVZ was top of the world PVZ at that moment. And he actually did like a charge lot all in that Cyril completely didn't scout, and he still held it.
Yeah,
he completely was not ready, and he like dragged a couple zealots in the wrong direction with the roach and held it, and it was just like, well, that seems silly.
And then if you include a best of 7 or best of 5 factor like you are, even in the weirdest case where you have like this crazy build no one's ever seen before that works, you get 1 game.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
Oh yeah, that's true.
You're still absolutely screwed against Cyril.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. And it's not that it's wrong that the best player wins, but you actually do have to give some sort of balance. And I think that team games generally get a better balance because there's so many factors into it, whereas a 1 versus 1 game, you have to be more careful about it. Because when it gets too stagnant like this, it can be a problem. And a couple thoughts as well is, at the beginning of Starcraft 2, we started off with like best of 7s at that time. We had only ever had best of 5s in Brood War. And I was like, this actually makes a lot of sense to me because back then, StarCraft 2 was much more volatile than Brood War. Now, over the years, as it's gotten more figured out, and especially because of the worker increase and the 2-player maps only, the volatility has gone so far down. Brood War is actually more volatile now than StarCraft 2, which is kind of wild. But that's
because Brood War is an older game.
I think there's like
Brood War is an older. The reason why he's saying it's wild, Brood War is an older game, and the longer the game exists, the more the game gets figured out, right? So this is something that happens in every RTS game. If you have a game, it comes out, and you do no balance changes in a year 2, 5, the game's gonna get figured out. So the fact that Brood War has more variety and more surprising moments than StarCraft 2 does, and Brood War's been out for what, 26 years, 25 years, is kind of crazy.
Quite the difference there. And I mean, Brood War has its own issues. We've gone to so many best of 7s now. It's like, which is reducing volatility. It's like a best of 5 is just kind of a more exciting thing a lot of the time, even though I want to see more games. As someone who just studies, like, I like having the best player win a lot, but like, yeah, I feel like this is an issue with StarCraft 2, and I think it really, the worker increase did so many bad things to StarCraft 2, but this is a big one, and only having 2-player maps took out so much. It took out so much because you can just go scout exactly when you want to scout.
Yeah.
You know exactly, you can, for whatever decision you want to make, you can just send out your scout to see it in time.
Yeah.
There was like, actually a big pushback when I was competing in StarCraft. There was a big pushback against 4-player maps that the pro players did not like them because sometimes you can have like, you get cheese or something like that. And then it kind of went down to 3 maps. Like there was some 3-player maps, or not 3 maps, 3-player maps. And then slowly those were kind of pushed out as well. And now it's only like 2-player maps. And I always said this, but it's just all the maps in StarCraft are just copied version of one another with like different tiles. That's about it.
About the units that StarCraft 2 has, so like for example Reapers, we've got hallucinations, we've got faster overlords, right? Like overlords are pretty fast. We basically have infinite vision, really, and we're also so good, like you can see the pro gamers and better pro gamers than me at basically immediately calling out a build based on what you see. So like for example, you absolutely can count resources basically. Like you can tell that buildings are not where they should be very quickly in StarCraft 2 at this point. We've played so many games now that missing minerals isn't a thing anymore, right?
Yeah.
Like when the earlier back you go, the harder it was to actually be certain that things were missing or that builders were on time or whatever, because they really weren't that refined. But now with more refinement means you basically know exactly what.
Is my stream alive? My chat was just loading for forever now. I don't know what the hell happened. Or maybe that's just on my side. Test. Hello.
They're doing.
Yeah, that's another big difference, I think, between Brood War and StarCraft 2, where in Brood War, like, there's a lot of trade-offs that you have to make with how many workers you have, how much attention you're giving to optimizing your economy. It's more easy for there to be missing minerals or hidden things going on. Also with the scaling of how mining works in StarCraft 1, like you actually you get many more resources, whereas you know exactly how many resources are coming in StarCraft 2. It's like very, very straightforward in that regard. I feel like too much has been done in StarCraft 2 that is like, this is what the pro gamers want,
Exactly.
so this is what they get.
Absolutely. There was way too much balancing. So I feel like the Balance Council looked at two different things. They looked at, and I'm talking like from the very beginning, there was a lot of balancing around removing RNG. There was a lot of balancing around removing inherently random things like 4-player maps. We were talking about this earlier. We had them. They're gone now. You know, even gold minerals and gas, like we play around with them, but every now and then pro gamers decide basically that they don't like it anymore, and Blizzard's like, okay, or whoever chooses the maps slowly removes them. All the really fun maps get banned 24/7, right? Like we never see fun maps. Nobody wants to play them. So I don't know. It's kind of sad. I wish there was less pandering to pros and more pandering to the audiences. I think having randomness or things that you need to be careful about doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to lose. So like, for example, if there's something that's random, you just need to account for that randomness, right? So like, for example, you'll have to play safer if an all-in can work based on RNG or whatever. Like, I don't know. I just don't see that removing RNG is a positive thing in any way.
You do need a certain amount of it. It's like really...
So if you have like a 3-player map or a 4-player map, and you don't scout your opponent, like what he said, you have to play safer against a potential all-in. At the same time, the opponent can do like the other side of the coin, where they can go super greedy because you didn't scout them, or you might not scout them, or whatever else. And that might diversify the builds quite a bit, just because of the maps, or because of the map size, or because the way the map is laid out. If it takes longer to arrive to your opponent's base, less time to arrive at your opponent's base. If I remember correctly, back when I was playing StarCraft, all the maps had almost identical travel time from one player's base to another. Like, if you send your worker to scout the opponent, it was almost identical travel time from one base to another. So even if you played on a different map, you didn't need to learn different timings based on the map, right? It's like always the same. And you have 3 matchups. You have, if you're, let's say, Protoss versus Terran, Protoss versus Zerg. Same travel time. The maps are almost identical. Because of the 12 workers, the ability to harass and do like these cheeky builds and harass builds or whatever is gone. Like in Wings of Liberty, they're used to, and Heart of the Swarm, you used to have like solid like 2 minutes to do harassment. Like with if you played, for example, Terran, you had like 2 minutes, maybe even more, 2 to 3 minutes to do harassment with Hellions, with Banshees, with Reapers, like with a lot of stuff, with Medevac drop, with a Mine drop. And now that's reduced to like a very low amount of time before your opponent just can fully defend it, as long as they're in the right place. So that's kind of the problem, and that's kind of, you know, in my video where I quit StarCraft 2, that's one of the reasons why I gave. I feel like the game just became too linear, and it became too much about, as I like to call it, like who can click faster instead of a strategy. Which, you know, an RTS, in my opinion, should be more about strategy than about mechanics in the first place. Mechanics are important and they should obviously be part of RTS, but it shouldn't be all about that. Like, to put in perspective, AoE 4 has how many matchups right now in the game? Is it 230? Something like that. Age of Empires 4, it's not 256 because you don't count, it's 240. Oh yeah, you don't count mirrors twice, so it's 240. So in AoE 4, Age of Empires 4, you have 240 matchups. And the randomness, for example, that Artosis is talking about, and no regret. What is his name? His name is Jake, right? If I remember correctly. The the stuff they're talking about is in AoE4 that exists, but you can scout it and react it to it, right? You can do counter damage, you can do counter harassment. So having 240 matchups might seem insane, especially someone from Starcraft, because obviously I used to play Starcraft. So if you told me something like that 4 years ago, I'd be like, that's too much RNG, but it's not. It's very good to keep diversity and to keep like strategies engaged, and the meta develops so much all the time in every single matchup, because even if you play one Civilization A4, you have 16 matchups that you have to learn, right? And once you learn them, let's say you have a winning strategy against one Civ, then if that Civ figures out how to defend it, you got to figure a counter way to play against it. And then you have to do that for the other 15. And then when the patch hits, everything changes. So it's like a lot more exciting, and there's always something you can learn. And I feel like the StarCraft 2 learning process stopped long time ago. Like long time ago. And I think that's kind of the problem I had with it, and I think the same thing they're talking about.
Important.
No, it is easier to play multiple civs in AoE4. That is true. Like StarCraft, obviously races are more diverse than English to French or to HRE in AoE4, but they are different enough to where the styles and the knowledge you have at the high level are extremely necessary.
Believe me, I mean, I know how badly it hurts when you lose a very important match to something that's a little bit out of your control. Like it's a terribly painful thing and everything, but it adds to that excitement. It adds to that volatility, which gives you differing results and makes things exciting and makes people feel like there's a chance something else will happen. And I just feel like that's at like an all-time low right now in StarCraft 2. The thing is, you want the best players to win the most. Obviously, you don't want it to just be coin flips. It's not gambling, but there should be a way to gamble as well inside of the game. Like it's something I feel like we're seeing all over the place too. It's like the more that you listen to people's opinions on how to do something, the worse things are.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be taking opinions. You need like someone strong just being like, no, this is what we're doing. Like in ASL, they don't give a shit that you don't want to play on some of the worst maps you've ever seen in the pro circuit. Like,
so I agree. So I was never part of the StarCraft 2 council. Like there was a period where I talked to David Kim, but it was like very short. So in AoE4, I'm part of the Balance Council and stuff like that. And even there, as someone who like has a lot of influence, devs do what they want to do, which I think is really important. So what he is saying is like the intern in StarCraft 2, I don't know how many people are working on StarCraft 2 right now, but whoever's working on StarCraft 2 always, like now looking back, always pandered to like the pro players, and whenever pro players would complain about they don't want to play this map, they would just stop making them completely. Like if there was any randomness, we removed that completely, right? So I think the problem isn't if a player is gambling and they get an auto win. If a player is gambling, that means you need to play safer. You cannot just do the same build over and over and hold against everything, right? So, but the fact that the other player has an option to gamble on like a 3 or 4 player map makes it so that you can't play the same thing and you have to adjust to it as well. And then you get diversity in a variety in like build orders and play styles and whatever else.
They're just like, no, this crazy ass map is in there. We've had maps that have 0% win rates in certain sides of matchups. 0. Literally 0. It ruins sometimes a season for a race. But you know what? It keeps it actually very fresh. Obviously, that's the crazy far example, but stuff like that can and has happened.
Yeah.
And a lot of the worst, most hated pro maps, what was it? Dawson Station, you remember that one?
Yeah.
People loved games on Dawson. Those were some of the most fun games I ever casted.
No, I agree.
I played the map too. Wasn't fun to play.
No, I agree.
But very oftentimes the maps that are not fun to play are the most fun to watch.
I agree. Yeah. I think it was
in moderation. I do want to say that. It's the same thing in AoE 4. I don't mind playing a weird map in a tournament or whatever, but I don't want to play the same weird map every tournament. But I think it's good to have a weird map or two in every tournament just to make it a bit more interesting. Like, just to force players to do something different. You know, just to change it up. I think at this point in Starcraft 2, like, there's two paths Starcraft will take, right? It will either remain the same, and it doesn't matter how many balance changes they do, by the way, in Starcraft 2. This problem that they're talking about, that I talked about, is going to stay no matter what. It won't change. It doesn't matter if they buff Terran, if they buff Zerg, if they buff Protoss, if they nerf either of those, if they change this. Starcraft 2 will have the same problem that they're talking about. What needs to be changed is something more fundamental to the game, which is, I think, starting with reducing the workers to 9 could help a lot. Slow down that early to mid game so you can open up for more harassment, but not slow it down too much to 6, because then there was like too much downtime, you know? So start something like that, or start experimenting with different maps, but not like your expansion is here and now on this map it's here. It's like, start actually experimenting with stuff like, I don't know, like Dasan Station was a map that, if I remember, that was the one where you had base somewhat closer to the middle. Like, you don't have maps like that in StarCraft 2, where it's like the bases are close, or there's a weird path to the enemy base, because all those things can diversify the gameplay and make it a lot more exciting, a lot more different. And in AoE 4, like with 240, do I remember test bug? Yeah, I do, with the rocks and the gold bases. In AoE 4, with 240 matchups, every tournament we have a map pool of 11 or 9 to 11 maps. And those 9 to 11 maps in AoE 4 are completely different. Like, you have a like open map type of maps, but those maps are still very different from one another. And depending on which map you play completely different style. Plus, we have water in AoE 4, so it's, you know, it adds an extra layer to it. But it's not only do you have all these different civs, but you also have all the different maps that also change the strategy and different matchups and everything else. Whereas I feel like in StarCraft, the maps are so similar to one another, they might as well just play on one map over and over at this point. Because, you know, someone will say, oh, it's, you know, it is different because there's destructible rocks from the third base. It's like, yeah, but it plays out the same way. It's the same thing, right? You know the Spider-Man meme pointing at each other? It's the same map.
Mistake to pander to the way pro gamers want, because if pro gamers could, like, I think if they could remove all RNG and have a dialogue tree, which, by the way, I don't even know why pro gamers like this. Like, I personally don't like having
Wait,
pro gamers could, like, I think if they could remove all RNG and have a dialogue tree, which, by the way, I don't even know why pro gamers like this. Like, I personally don't like having basically a certain type of way you have to play because it's the only valid way to play.
It's terrible. Like, that's terrible for our
very first time in my entire life. After I realized, like, Ling Hydra Bane openings were like the only option at some point.
Yeah.
And it was super boring. Like, it was just like, oh, I'm gonna do this Ling Bane attack. If they hold it, I lose. If they don't, I win.
I win, yep.
And that was like the only thing we were doing for a while. Like, it just sucked.
Yeah.
So
I don't know if there's a way to fix this at this point, because
they need to start doing crazy things. Like, they could do it. Like, they could fix it by, like, saying, all right, we're removing this unit, we're adding this unit, 4-player maps are in, and fuck you guys.
Yeah, well,
but that will
they can, okay, so I said they can make all different maps, but actual different maps. They could change the workers to 9. Or another thing that I actually had the idea for long ass time ago was for them to have seasons in StarCraft 2. And I think I made this video probably 2019, maybe 18, to make seasons in StarCraft 2 where they would rotate the units out. So, for example, let's say there's 3 seasons in a year. Each one lasts 4 months. And at the end of each season, you have a tournament. You have a big tournament. So the first season, Hellions would be removed and replaced by vultures from StarCraft 1, and they would remove Raven and put in Science Vessel for Terran, right? So something along those lines. And then for Protoss, they would remove Stalkers, add Dragoons, and they would add like Dark Archons, you know? And then for Zerg, they would remove Infestor and add a Defiler. So that's another way to completely change the game, and it would keep StarCraft 2 so fresh, and it would completely change the way it's played. Too complex for? It's not really complex. Players would have to actually play a strategy game instead of a mechanics game. So, yeah.
Never happened.
The big problem is, I think right now, is that you have that balance council, and the balance council is completely biased. They're putting out a lot of change.
Interesting, but sounds like a balance nightmare. Yeah, that's why you have developers balancing. That's their job. See, that kind of thinking, but what about balance, is what got StarCraft 2 in this position.
That don't make sense. It's very obvious it doesn't make sense. You know, like it's like you're nerfing Protoss. Like what? What's going on here? It's like, oh, the Queen costs 25 more minerals. Did you see this in the patch? The Queen. No. Okay, the most recent PTR patch, the Queen got increased 25 minerals, and so they made the Spore stronger, the Spine stronger. The Hatch, 25 minerals cheaper. I saw that. Basically, Zerg got across the board buffs for 25 more minerals on the Queen.
Nice. Minerals are the most important.
So apparently what's happening in StarCraft 2, like, there's, like, a guy, I'm assuming, working on balance, and there's this, like, Discord where the players are giving suggestions. But, so I went through the changes off of stream, and the changes make no fucking sense, because you can see it's made by a bunch of people who are not developers, right? They're just looking at how do we balance it, how, like, they have no clue about development of the game. So what he just said is the same thing that I found very funny. So the patch notes start with Queen cost increased by 25, and you're like, okay, Zerg has been dominant for a while, okay, and then they buff like 3 other things for Zerg. And it's like, well, you didn't do anything there. You know what I mean? In return, you ended up buffing Zerg. Like, it was supposed to nerf the Zerg, but it didn't do anything, or it buffed it. So it's like, what are we doing?
Resource too, so that makes a lot of sense.
Dude,
oh yeah, and Protoss got shafted.
You know why people
pretty
mass
bad.
Queens? Do you know why people mass Queens besides them just being
so
good?
easy?
Yeah, but also it's like the best mineral investment you can make, right? Under 50 minerals, transfuse, decent AA, creep spread.
Yeah.
So adding an additional 25 minerals does absolutely fucking nothing, right?
No, obviously. But I mean, that's what they come out with, and
especially with Zerg.
Like if they added gas, that would be like, whoa, that would be a big change.
You can't have the people whose lives depend upon winning balance
take
the game.
too, yeah.
It doesn't make sense, and
they can contribute to the balance, but they cannot be in charge of it. Like, they cannot. Like, you know what you need some proper nerfs for things like those that people have found strong for a very long time. Not like, we'll nerf it, but we'll actually buff this thing that helps it anyway.
The thing is, I really wish that there would be a person or an organization that would just take it over and stop having fucking endless meetings deciding these things. Like, honestly, okay, if I can just go ahead and say this, I would... If I took over StarCraft 2, first off, I would redo a lot of the balance shit. Like, I feel like it's gone a lot in the wrong direction. But I would also instantly bring the starting worker count down to 6, where it was in Wings of Liberty. 100%. Changes the game so much. There's no early game. You know, there's no early game in StarCraft.
What did I talk about at the start of this video? Listen, he's gonna say the same thing.
Changes the game so much. There's no early game. You know, there's no early game in StarCraft 2.
I think we've talked about this before, or I've definitely talked to this with pro gamers as well. But why the jump to 12 workers is basically the same thing as jumping to pylon, gate cyber, and a nexus on the bottom on the base. Like, so like, why didn't we just jump?
Do you know what? Do you know what this is equivalent to? By the way, guys, this is equivalent to. There we go. Empire Wars in AoE 4. This is why I was so against AoE 4, Empire Wars in AoE 4, because I have seen it already with Starcraft. So for those that don't know, I don't know if there's anyone watching from Starcraft. I don't know if I'm even in the Starcraft 2 section. AoE 4 at one point had a push for Empire Wars, which is starting with more workers, and I was extremely against it because I have seen it already in StarCraft, and I did not want the same thing to happen again. And I am very happy that AoE 4 community as a whole completely just said no to Empire Wars.
Yes.
Two base,
Yes.
gate, cyber, and
Yes.
warp gate on the way, right?
Yes.
Like, and the same
Basically.
thing with like
Empire Wars is
Zerg, it could be
basically what
hatch,
StarCraft
and a
2
pool,
had.
right?
Yeah.
Because really, we've
Yeah.
eliminated all of the one base options anyways.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's exactly the same thing. There are
Exactly.
no deviations that are actually valid based on
And
the
then
12 worker
someone will go ahead and point out the 2 times that it happened and
Yeah.
it worked, and it's like, okay, that's not what we're talking about.
No.
You get, if you have less workers, every choice means
I love how Artosis gets triggered about the same thing that I got triggered back in the day. Because I would bring up this point, right? And then someone would be like, well, did you see the game between this and this player? It's like, bro, we're talking about thousands and thousands of games, and you can find one game where something happened. That's not...
okay, that's not what we're talking about.
No.
You get, if you have less workers, every choice means a lot more.
More.
Like,
Every
if you're
worker
actually gonna
killed
send out
means
your
a lot
worker
more.
proxy or something, right? Or you're going to go scout. It costs you a lot more percentage-wise of your
Right.
income, so it hurts more.
Yep.
Like these
Scouting with 6 workers is a lot more percentage of your economy than scouting with 12 workers. It doesn't matter whether you scout immediately or after a minute. You're still losing a larger part of your economy, so it becomes more of a choice, which is what should happen in RTS games. You should also be able to say, you know what, I'm not going to scout. It's costing me too many resources. Right? I'm just going to save up those, whatever, 50, 60, 70, 80 minerals to not scout. That's the gamble I'm willing to take. But with the 12 worker start, and at a point where scouting, you're basically not losing a lot of economy because you have so many workers already in your base. So, yeah.
things are important. So I would bring it back down to the 6 workers. I would probably change how the minerals work right now, where it's like the half patches and stuff, but not 100% sure on that. Like, and I would bring back 4-player maps, 3-player maps, maybe 5-player maps. Like,
Yeah.
have some variety in there where you can't, and then someone will be like, oh, well, and push the glasses back and be like, you know what? Now suddenly there's this rush that can't be stopped. No. Stop that. This is like the poison that could be spewed into brains to get you to think that this is the only way StarCraft 2 can be, and it's not. And I wish that someone would change these things. And how much more exciting would it be with,
by the way,
with it a different way, where there's actually some chances for other early game things to happen?
I think it might be too late for StarCraft 2 to change that much. I think all the players and all the people and all the pros that were invested into this kind of thing, that me, Artosis, and Jake are talking about, I think all those people quit the game already. You know, it stopped being their game a long time ago. I mean, StarCraft 2 stopped being my game a long time ago for those reasons. And I think the people that are playing the game right now want the game to be what it is now. So I think those kinds of things will most likely never happen. I think it would be great for the game, but like the amount of people that would come back, like no one's gonna come back because you made a queen at 25 minerals more expensive or cheaper. Nobody gives a shit about that. But people would potentially come back if you made these massive changes to how StarCraft was, and maybe modernize them a bit, change some things, and so on and so forth. Like we see this with AoE 4, whenever there's a small patch, you don't really see a big increase in players, but whenever you see a patch that changes the game a lot, or when you see new civilizations added, there's a massive surge of players coming back and playing the game again. So, yeah. It's sad, but I don't think it's going to happen.
By the way, we all played StarCraft 2 from the beginning, right? There were periods of time where this unstoppable rush happened, right? Like this is actually the most fun I've ever had in StarCraft. Now that I think about it, like there were builds, everyone would kind of stumble upon them. They'd be super good, right? Everyone would like lose to them. Like remember 7 Roach Rush and shit? Like, oh, that was so good, and then eventually it falls out because you can defend it. Or like, oh, Blue Flame Hellion pushes were really good. Yeah. 3 pylon walls, you remember that? I mean, they put the supply depot there because that was kind of imba. But point being, there were many Broodlord Infestor. There are many different builds / comps that were kind of
Broodlord Infestor was definitely broken.
Of imba and figuring it out. Maybe at some point it becomes clear that it is completely imbalanced, but we can't jump to that conclusion. Like, for example, Broodlord Infestor was imba, but yeah, like I'm okay with periods of time where there's some imbalance and there's some understanding. I feel like there's
as long as the game's evolving,
preventing all imbalanced from the beginning, if that makes sense, and not enough exploring. So, like, for example, do you remember when we were talking about the Mothership patch? And we were, like, kind of excited. We're like, oh, shit, the Mothership might actually be, like, a decent unit. And then we kept scrolling, and it was like, oh, just kidding. This is the horror. They, like, reverse all of its coolness. Right? Like, come on. Can we not make an imbalanced Mothership for a little bit and see what it does? You know?
Yeah.
Like, let's have some fun. Let's bring back Time Warp. Or not Time Warp. What was the black hole? Do you remember the black hole?
Toilet? Yeah, the vortex.
Like, let's have fun with some of that stuff again. Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
Honestly,
Argon Toilet was fun. I mean, it was stupid, and we should have played around with it, but it was fun.
Yeah.
Legacy of the Void is probably the best. How do I put this? Legacy of the Void is probably the most, not balanced. It's the most streamlined version of Starcraft, and it's like there's no upsets and better player wins, right? Comparing to HOTS and Wings. HOTS was definitely the worst, I think. And I think most people in StarCraft, no matter if you're like the 6 or 12 worker star, will agree that HOTS was probably the worst. And the devs dropped the ball in HOTS quite a bit. They waited way too long for stuff to be fixed, namely Swarm hosts and mech were terrible for the game, right, at the time. So even with that being said, I always thought the most fun I have ever had in StarCraft 2 when I played it was in Wings of Liberty, all the way up until the end, because the end was just Broodlord Infestor. Wings of Liberty, in my opinion, was the best version of StarCraft. Not because it was balanced, not because the games were better. The games were trash compared to Legacy of the Void games. I mean, when you watch Legacy of the Void people play, you're like, how do they do all the things they're doing kind of thing. But Wings had something that Legacy lost a long time ago, which is, I remember, I sometimes tell this story in my stream, but I remember waking up at like 5 a.m. or 4 a.m. to watch GSL. Because I was like, they're going to do some new builds, and watching it live was super cool. And it went from that, where it's like you want to watch every tournament to see what the Europeans, what the Koreans, what the NA guys are going to prepare, what's going to be new, who's going to upset who, to now you just kind of scroll through the results. Or at least that's how it turned out for me. So while Wings of Liberty skill of players was very low, the game quality was not good, overall the way the game was developing was the best, because you had so many choices and you had so many options. Like the amount of builds, and when I say builds, I don't mean just cheeses. There was a lot of cheeses you can do. Trust me, there was a lot of cheeses. The amount of different maps that you had. I mean, and again, Steps of War, if you guys remember, it was one of the worst maps we ever had. But it was a very unique map. Then you had Metalopolis. Then you had like the Zelnaga Caverns. Like, all those maps are completely different from one another, right? Metalopolis to Steps of War to Zelnaga Caverns, those are completely different maps. Scrap Station, right? Those were all unique maps, and this is what StarCraft 2 lost a long time ago. Wings of Liberty had actual different maps. Like, the maps played out different. The build orders, depending on the map, were completely different. Scrap Station, you don't do like a back in the day, like a Marine Rush or whatever. You would rush Banshees or you would rush Mutas on one hatchery. And that was cool. Like, that was different. So you had that, you had game that was early into the, you know, just released, so there was a lot of obviously new stuff, people not knowing what's what. Then you have a lot of variety in cheeses. There are so many cheeses you can do because of the 6-worker start. There's a lot of options you can do. But not only cheeses, not only macro build orders, you had a lot of styles, right? So you had styles of like, I remember there were some players that were playing around with like Mass Marine plus Banshees. Then you had players that were playing Marine Tank. Then you had players that were playing only Marine Marauder, Marine King Prime, right? He played Marine Marauder almost in like every matchup for a while until he started adding siege tanks. You had players that were trying to go Mass Air somewhat quickly. You had players trying to go Mass Raven immediately, right? You had mech into Ravens. All different builds. You had like people who were massing Hellions. And that's just for Terran. Now you have for Zergia, for Protoss. And a lot of people think that this is a normal... And I used to believe this too. Before I started playing A4. People believe that this is just a normal, natural path of an RTS, right? It starts wild and then it kind of just... The path is just narrowing down to what's good. But that it doesn't have to be that way. Like, AoE 4 came out 3 years ago now, and we're entering 4th year, and the game is still evolving, the game is still being developed, and obviously, you know, I know some people will say, yeah, but StarCraft 2 is not being developed, there's no developers. I'm not necessarily talking about now, I'm talking about like 3, 4, 5 years ago when there were. Nothing was being done, and they were okay to get the game to a point where it won't need changes. And if I remember correctly, that was actually one of their quotes in post, that they want to get StarCraft 2 to a point where it doesn't need any help, right? Kind of like Brood War. But Brood War community, right? Korean community took upon themselves long time ago to start changing the game in their own way through maps and through different things. And it works for them. In StarCraft 2, the problem is not only you don't have developers that are not doing it, but also the community is completely okay with the game being the way it is. Which is why I said I don't think that there's a chance of that ever changing, sadly.
Yeah. I really wish that there could be a different direction to go into to kind of give some life to the... Just make it that much different. I was thinking, you know what would be cool is if there was actually like a Wings of Liberty league. That would be kind of hype. If you had all the pros actually playing Wings of Liberty for a few months, like against each other, and see what that looks like before every unit moves so fast. Like you have no medevac boost back then, and you know you have 6-worker starts and 4-player maps and 5-player maps and stuff like that. I think something like that would be really cool.
I agree. I still thinking about some of the most hype moments in StarCraft 2 for me are those moments of like an Archon toilet hitting,
Dude, the Kiwi Kaki, yeah.
Like, yeah,
up in the middle of the night watching that, I was like, damn.
Archon toilet, bailing bombs still happen. Raven, Seeker missiles, nukes, right? I mean, disruptors exist now, right? But those are the most exciting moments.
This is so sick.
We don't have that shit anymore, right?
Yeah.
Or at least I don't feel that same type of like, oh my god, that could happen, or oh, if he just gets the sick Archon toilet and come back, or you know, like there is, once you start seeing the needle going in one player's favor, it could be like the next 20 minutes they're dying. You know, like we could literally watch someone with a 10,000 bank sit there and literally whittle them away for 45 minutes and never have been at a disadvantage, but they can't kill them because if they do, then they are losing their advantage. It's just so boring, honestly. Like, it's so boring to watch someone with a 10k bank not commit because they don't want to have that resource effectiveness shift in the other person's favor. So they basically have to play out an hour-long game. Like, I don't know. It just sucks, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't think I have too many other thoughts on it. Anything
no.
for you?
I think the only thing in terms of thoughts, we talked about it a bit as well, I think battle aces will have this problem too. Like, I don't see the volatility there per se. like we were talking about, remember how volatile StarCraft 1 was, or StarCraft 2 was, and then how, I guess, figured out it became? My biggest fear is Battle Aces will actually rush that, right? Like, there might be very few compositions, ultimately. There might be very few relevant playstyles over time. Without basically all information being given, there might be basically one way to play. Like, we'll see.
I think the overarching reason for this has to do with as economy management becomes easier, it allows way more time to be spent on like strategically what's going on. That's a big thing in Brood War, where like you can play strategically incorrectly, but if you have your management down, then you can still win like that. Whereas you have like the top pros all macro very similarly in a lot of these newer RTS games, and that just it kind of like levels that playing field, like, and yeah, I think that's the big differentiator there. Another thing though, another just thought. I feel like RNG in Battle Aces would be really frustrating, like more frustrating than RNG in for StarCraft, for example, because I feel like Battle Aces is such a balanced game in terms of like, it's such a, I guess, equal or balanced game that, for example, if RNG means you lose a battle by X%, you might never win the game, right? Like, it's very possible that if you have one bad fight in Battle Aces, you cannot recover. So I'm not sure how I feel about RNG. I'm not sure. Yeah, like in StarCraft 2, I just feel like RNG, you can be aware of it and come back from it. But for example, in Hearthstone, when RNG screws you, you never come back. You just kind of die. Well, RNG could go the other way as well. Yeah, I guess true. Yeah, comeback mechanics are an important thing. It'll be interesting to see how they deal with those, but like top decking, that's really frustrating, no? Of course. Well, you need to have some frustrating things because that's also fun for the person who gets it. So and for the viewers, for sure. Yeah, there's not much top decking in StarCraft 2 right now. No, no. I just wish we could. We need to incorporate randomness. We need to incorporate hooks and ways, comeback mechanics. And we cannot pander to pro gamers because they are the last people that should be deciding what is interesting to watch, basically. Yeah.
Yep. And the problem is, apparently the pro players are the ones that are doing the balance against StarCraft 2. So that's a rough one.
Ultimately, esports are for watching, not for playing. So do not listen to pro gamers if you're making a game. You need to actually listen to your audiences. Not fully, but you need to take into account more. I disagree. Don't listen to your audiences either. Audiences don't fucking know. Listen to the person who's making the game. Let someone with a strong vision push forward. Yes, I'm just saying.
Let devs do the job. Like, they should take insight from pro players. They should take insight from community. But they should do what that's their job. That's what they're good at. That's what they should do.
Listen to a single chatter. I'm just saying you'll know what what the audiences actually want. You know, you'll know what. For example, we knew Archon Toilet was fun, right? Audiences loved it, right? So it's gone, of course. Of course, yeah. It's gone. So, and also some things that were really unfun. I mean, sometimes they overlapped, like Swarmhost. Literally nobody liked that. Swarmhost for Swarmhost, nobody liked that. Pro gamers didn't like that, and the audiences didn't like that. So why did we have them?
David Kim.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So, anyways, it was a good chat. Yeah. Let us know what you guys think.
All right, I'm gonna link the video. So, yeah, I mean, I agree with him. I don't know what else to say. Like I said, I've had this discussion many times, and I've had these rants many times about the same topic, and like I just feel like whenever I spoke about this, I'm speaking to like people that just don't want the same thing, which is, like I said, I think people that do want these changes they're mentioning are a long time gone. And someone said, what is the how does comeback possibility in AoE4 compare to StarCraft 2? So in AoE4, okay, let me put it this way. In StarCraft 2, it is very easy to kill workers, right? Very easy. Like, an oracle comes in your base, you're not prepared, 10 workers gone. You know what I mean? A Widow Mine drop happens, you don't pay attention for 2 seconds, 16 workers deleted, right? And from that point, you're dead. The game is decided. It's over, right? So the comeback potential from then on is for you to do the same thing to your opponent, but because you just lost a bunch of workers, the opponent knows the only way for you to come back is doing the same thing to them. They will just play very defensive and prevent that, and then they will push and kill you, right? That's Starcraft 2 in a nutshell, right? In AoE 4, it's a lot harder to kill workers, okay? It's a lot harder to kill workers, but even when you do kill them, it does put the enemy at a disadvantage, but it's not like, first of all, you cannot kill 10 workers in AoE4 in like 2 seconds. You need like 30 seconds to kill 10 workers with one unit, okay? So in order for you to kill that many, let's say 10 workers, you actually need to outplay your opponent multiple times, right? Or your opponent needs to not pay attention multiple times for that to happen. But even then, let's say you lose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 workers. You cannot just do this like right click and you kill the enemy workers and you're fine. You still need to find a way to outplay your opponent. But the difference is, in AoE 4, you go out on the map for resources. So it's a completely different RTS, the way it's played. So in AoE 4, let's say one player is here and one player is here. Resources in AoE 4 are randomly generated, okay? So we have a map, Dry Arabia, which is like the most standard map. So when you enter a game, the gold might be here, the opponent's gold might be here. And then the next game, if you play again on Dry Arabia, your gold might be here, your opponent's gold might be here, right? So there's a lot of ways to counterplay and punish your opponent. But what's important is, if this is your main base, right? You can't, some civs can, but most civs cannot stay in their main base forever. So let's say the opponent is defending this pretty well. After a bit of time, both players have to go out on the map to get resources. So the chances to outplay your opponent and out-multitask your opponent increase over time. You cannot just sit in your base and do nothing. The opponent can potentially like block you out of getting resources like this, and then you're just gonna lose the game, right? So there's a lot more chance for not only punishing the opponent, there's a lot more chance for scouting, but there's also a lot more chance for comeback because of the way AoE 4 economy works. Than in Starcraft 2. Like in Starcraft 2, right, when you start, let's say you're on 2 bases. Like you have a base here and you have a base here. So if you put your units here and here, the opponent has nothing to harass, right? So if I'm yellow, my opponent is red, I do a Widow Mine drop and I kill 12 workers, right? 12 workers just died here. What is the obvious thing that the opponent is going to do? The opponent is not going to do a main army push. He has less army, most likely, right? Because his economy just got evaporated. So the best chance for the opponent to win, technically it depends on the part of the game, but they could all in and try to win. So the opponent will either push through the middle and try to end the game, or do the same thing to you to harass your mineral line. But because your resources are in the same spot and your opponent knows where they are and every map is the same, then all you got to do is not let them kill your workers and you win the game, right? Which is why so often at the pro level in Starcraft, if a player takes massive amounts of damage, like 10 workers or 5 or 6, whatever, sometimes they just leave the game. They just GG and leave the game because they're not going to come back from that if their harassment didn't work. So the process goes like this. Red lost 12 workers, red loads up a medevac, drops the Widow Mines, kills 1 worker, loses 4 Widow Mines, red taps out, right? In AoE 4 it doesn't work like that. You have a lot more options and you have a lot more time to come back into the games, and the games cannot end in 2 seconds. Like, your army cannot get wiped out in 2 seconds. Your worker line cannot get wiped out in 2 seconds. There's a lot more decision making and a lot more strategy. So AoE 4 is easier mechanically than StarCraft 2. Like, I would say StarCraft 2, like 90% of it is mechanics, 10% is strategy at this point. AoE 4, I would say it's like 75-25. maybe even 80% strategy, 20% mechanics. There's a lot of knowledge and a lot of strategy that you need to have to do well in AoE4 at the top level. Like, if there's a player that's just mechanically really good, he's not going to win games. Like, he needs to actually know how to play the game. Whereas, I feel like in Starcraft 2, if you are Grandmaster and you just learn a build per matchup, and you just execute it really well, you can destroy most of the players in the game. That does not work in AoE4. So, yeah. And that's why, right? I always said this. StarCraft used to be my game. I still respect StarCraft. I respect people who play StarCraft, but it hasn't been my game for a very long time. And the reason why I love AoE4 and the reason why I switched to AoE4 full time is because I want to play a strategy game. I don't want to play a, real-time strategy game, not a real-time mechanics game. So, yeah. How much does that have to do with the amount of Civ AoE4 has compared to StarCraft 2? I mean, it definitely has, but there's a lot of things. Like, I would even... It's at the point where I wouldn't even put StarCraft 2 and AoE4 into the same genre of games. Like, yes, they're both RTS games, but they're completely different RTS games, right? They don't really have much in common. Like, StarCraft 2 economy, for example, is you rally workers onto a mineral line and you stop building when it's 16. That's the extent of StarCraft 2 economy. Like, imagine if you play AoE4 and you put 16 workers on sheep and you're done. That's it. You don't make workers anymore until you get another berry patch. That's how StarCraft economy is. AoE4 economy is a lot more complicated because you have 4 resources and some civs even have 5, right? So there's a lot more knowledge into it. But obviously StarCraft 2 you have to be a lot more like reactive, a lot more mechanically faster, and because the games can end so quickly, you need to be on top of your things at all times. Want to see your next casual 2v2 with Cyril? Would be really interesting. I actually messaged Cyril, I don't know, like a while back, but he was in the army. So Cyril, for those that don't know, plays AoE4 pretty regularly for the past 3 years. Like, he plays with Zhugliang, I think. And I actually messaged him and I was like, hey, I saw you're still playing AoE4. If you ever want to play, let me know. And he said, I'm in the army right now, but, you know, I'll poke you when... I'll message you when I'm back and stuff like that. Because I understand, it's his game for fun, you know? Like, he doesn't play it super tryhard or anything like that. So, yeah. Alright, that's it. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you so much for watching. Shout out to Artosis and Jake, as always. And check me out on Twitch. I'm probably live right now with AoE4. If you're watching on Twitch, let's keep going.